In 1967, S.E. Hinton rose from obscurity and, despite being a high school student, created the young adult fiction genre with the novel The Outsiders. A tale of class division and youthful angst, this book was the first in a blockbuster class of literature worth $11 billion a year. I don't know if Ponyboy stayed gold, but somebody sure did. Whatever you may think of young adult novels, it's an industry force that can't be ignored. So, we decided to travel back to the days of middle school and revisit this groundbreaking book. Can you feel the dried hunk of gum under the desk and smell the Axe body spray? If so, pour yourself some cherry coke and rum and join us for episode 74 of Toasting the Classics, The Outsiders. Welcome to Toasting the Classics, the podcast where we take something that people call a classic and we talk about it for a little while and decide whether it really should be a classic. And what we do also is we drink something that's been inspired by the purported classic. My name's Dave McArthur.
And my name is Clint Lanier. And let me just say this, between the two of us, we probably have, I would say, close to 50 years of education. Maybe that's gilding the lily a little bit, maybe 30, 40.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that sounds about it. It depends.
Like
did kindergarten really add to...
Yeah. Well, I'm counting preschool to... Yeah, we both have doctorates. You have a Juris Doctorate. I have a PhD.
That's true.
We both have master's degrees, both have bachelor's degrees. My bachelor's degree was in length about as long as it takes others to get a doctorate. So that actually adds a little bit to it. Point is, we are both very learned as well as wise crackers. So that's what gives it.
All right, did you say that us being crackers qualifies us for this? Is that what you just said?
Wise. Well, I was about to say wise asses, but every now and then a kid might listen to this. So welcome. And what are we doing today? This is my pick. I guess I should announce it, right?
This is your pick. It came around to book for this week. So you picked a book. And,
I picked a book.
Your reading level is about the same as a seventh grader, so you chose something that most people handle in middle school.
That's great. I'll speak to that in a second. So we are reading the 1967 classic by S.E. Hinton.
No, it's a purported classic. It's a purported classic.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Not a classic yet.
Okay, very, very good. Very good. Good correction there. But this is The Outsiders. And I have to admit, it didn't seem like young adult literature when I read it the first time as a young adult. That's so funny. And I think I would venture that if you went to high school, like 90%, 80% of people went to middle school, high school in this country, in the United States, in the past 30 or perhaps 40 years, you probably read this book. And I never put it together that was the level this was written for until I read it as an adult. I mean, I haven't read this since I was like 14 or 15. I saw the movie, I think, when I was like 14 or 15.
So I'm in a really weird position with this one. I'm a complete Outsiders virgin. I've never read the book. I've never seen the film.
Oh, okay. All right.
I've been aware of this as a cultural phenomenon my entire life. So it's actually one of my favorite things about doing a show is to finally catch up on some of this stuff. Like when is a grown man going to sit down and read The Outsiders, right? Like it's just, I didn't read this YA novel from the 1960s. I guess I'll sit down and just pick this one up, So this was a great opportunity for me to finally close the loop on something that I missed. Next week, we're going to do Johnny Tremaine or something else that I should have read in sixth grade.
I was going to say, we're not reading Twilight. And we're not reading the Hunger Games, so
no.
we won't be doing any.
Hunger Games doesn't suck as much as Twilight. The book was better. And by the way, I didn't actually end up reading Twilight. I was about to. I was finally when my daughter was about that age. I was right about to read it, and then I got some reports from other people about what was in it, and I was like, I'm not reading that. That's garbage. I'm not reading that. So.
It really is garbage. Absolute garbage. Even my daughter, my 16-year-old, she read it and said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever read in my life. She's 16. Like she's the target audience.
Did I ever tell you the anecdote about Wind Cave National Park? You can tell they explore constantly and add new chambers and new caves to the map as time goes on. And there's a certain level of the caves that was found about 40 years ago where all of the rooms are named after things from Star Wars. And then 10, 15 years later, you get all the things are named after Lord of the Rings. And then
don't tell me.
As the caves get deeper and smaller, you end up having to use female cavers. And these female cavers are exploring around 2008, 2009, 2010. So there's all these chambers named like Edward Room and like Bella Room, and everything is from Twilight. I just think that's been permanently enshrined in the geographical map of North America in a hilarious way, and I love that. But
That's a great story. All right, synopsis. So, written in 1965, 66, published 1967. This is a book set in Tulsa, Oklahoma, although it never really mentions that.
can I pause something? Pause for something
Sure.
graphical about the author really quick, just a request I want to make. This book is by S.E. Hinton, and I
Yes.
would like us to not talk too much about who that is until the very end, because that was
Okay.
my biggest surprise, and it
Okay.
completely changed what I thought of the book afterwards. When I looked at the article about the author, I was like, oh my God, like that's what was going anyway. So that's going to be my biggest
Yeah.
surprise. So be careful.
Right.
Tread
Right.
lightly. So anyway, yeah. So go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay.
Synopsis
So,
about that.
written in the first person, it's the story of two opposing gangs in Tulsa. There's the Greasers and the Socias, or
Right.
short for socials. Short for socials.
Which
So
is
you've got kind of
spelled,
the
which
rich.
is spelled socks.
Well, and the character that you're following, this kid named Ponyboy, admits that I don't know how to spell it, which is kind of weird. That's like breaking the fourth wall. He's like, I don't know how you abbreviate or how you shorten socials, but that's what we call them or something. So it's these two groups, the Greasers and the Socials, and it's written from the point of view of the Greasers, from a kid named Ponyboy. Ponyboy lives with his two older brothers, Soda Pop and Derry, short for Daryl, and only person with a real name entire book, I think. Both their parents are dead. Derry's sort of raising them. His middle brother, Soda Pop, who is apparently like Errol Flynn looking guy, soap opera star
Wait,
looks.
Errol Flynn is your go-to for hot guys?
Yeah, I just thought of it. I don't know. Who would you go to?
Okay.
Probably Jimmy Stewart.
Oh,
huh?
I don't know. Being as I'm not a World War One veteran,
John Wayne. I don't know.
Yeah, John Wayne. Okay, all
I
right,
don't know.
fair enough.
But
fair enough.
anyway, okay. George Clooney. How's that?
How
George
about
Clooney?
Rob Lowe? Rob Lowe would be a pretty good go-to for
Rob Lowe. Was that who played him, or was it Tom
Yeah.
Cruise?
No, it's Rob
One of
Lowe
the two.
plays.
Was it
Soda,
Rob
so-
Lowe who played him? Okay.
Yeah, which is perfect.
So anyway,
casting. Perfect casting,
right.
by the way. So
Two older brothers, parents dead, raising, the oldest brother's raising himself, pretty much all dropouts, but they're all part of this kind of gang, but it's more of like a social, like a community. It's a gang based on families and friends. And what binds them all together is they're all poor, they're all sort of illiterate, they're all looked down on by the rest of the town, and they all have certain traits that they share. They all grease their hair back. They all like cars. Matter of fact, I was thinking, I wonder if this is where Grease got the name of their movie from, Grease, or
the concept of the greaser is definitely something to be talked about here.
yeah.
I don't think this book created the concept of the greaser. I think it may have popularized it in some kind of way, but I think the greaser was in the culture in the 50s and 60s. And so was Grease like created by this book to some extent? I'm sure it was, but I think the greaser was a familiar concept to people.
Probably
it's something
probably
I wish I could ask my dad about it. I'm sure he would be able to give me a better answer.
Right. Well, he defines it a few times. There's a few times in the book where he says we're greasers, and somebody says, "You're a what?" He says, we're hoods, meaning hoodlums or something like that, right? I would think of Marlon Brando made a movie called The Wild Ones, or The Wild One rather, and it was kind of a motorcycle gang. Yeah,
or the way James Dean looks. Yeah. The motorcycle jacket, the jeans, the white T-shirt, the slick back hair. Have you ever been to a rockabilly show?
Yeah.
Like I went to a rockabilly show one time, and like the girls were all dressed like Okies from Grapes of Wrath, and the guys were all dressed like James Dean. And I was like, I think that's I don't know. That's like I feel like
pretty
it's
much
mixing two cultures in a weird sort of way, but it's
I would
also
say the girls were dressed like 50s pinup girls or something like that.
I remember
who did you
the
see?
singer. It was just a random band I saw when I was in Sacramento, and the lady who was singing looked kind of like Rosie the Riveter, like a more full-figured version of Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah, cool.
She had, like the headband, the red.
Ella King. Ella King would be kind of like that.
Okay.
That,
Interesting fact about her. Did you know she's Rob Schneider's daughter?
Rob Schneider, yeah.
That is the weirdest.
You totally see it.
That is the weirdest.
When you look
thing.
at him,
like, no.
When you see them together,
He's not old enough to have a daughter who's a grown person, is he? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, he's about 20. He's got about 15 or 20 on us. But in any case, I'll just say I have the one rockabilly show, and of all the rockabillys, I saw the rockabilly. I saw Reverend Horton Heat. Excuse me, the Reverend Horton Heat. But so you got the greasers. It's told from their point of view. The other side is kind of two-dimensional. Is called the socials or the socials. So they would be sort of what we would call the jocks or the popular kids. They're the good kids. Well, everybody thinks they're
No,
good, right? They look up well, no, no.
when I was in high school, we called those kids the Chads because there were multiple guys named Chad in that group of like football players that we would get in fights with all the time. So we just called them the Chads, like the whole group of them. So basically, it's the same as saying socias, I guess, but they tended to be more wealthy. But I don't know if that was the main divide. It was mostly the sports. It was mostly being on the sports team was what made the other for us. So anyway,
right. Well, so these kids were, live on different sides of the track, I guess. And they have a kind of this innate bred in hatred for each other. They'll get jumped. The greasers will get jumped by the socias if they walk alone. And it really makes the socias out to be the villains here. A lot of circumstances happened. One of the greasers ends up killing a soc. And so the two youngest, Pony Boy and his friend Johnny, have to split. They have to flee town. So there's a lot of drama around that. And that's really sort of the central catalyzing event for the story. And throughout it, what the author does is provide like a lot of different layers and complexities for these characters. As it goes on, you start seeing the characters acting in a way that, it's not the stereotype. I guess that's the point, is it's sort of showing the stereotypes don't really work, or they break down when you start looking at these people in their personal capacities, that they have feelings and they're sensitive and they're smart and they're intellectual and they're brave. And so that by the end of it, you've got this full kind of tableau of this society that is typically looked down on. These people that are outsiders, they are outside the norms of or conventions of society. That's all superficial, but they are every bit as much. They have all the virtues and qualities of somebody that would be in quote unquote normal society, I guess.
So I mentioned like being in high school, and I remember like being in the beginning of high school and starting to make friends with some of the kids who were like punk rock type guys. They were like skaters and punk rockers and stuff. And I remember being really surprised. I remember being really surprised, like how nice they were. I remember they look all tough, and then I'd start hanging out with them and I'd be like, well, these guys are actually nicer and more sensitive and more friendly than the other people. So I started gravitating towards those guys way more because I think I kind of had, it was a strange, kind of counterintuitive to me that it turned out that way. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. It's hard for me to talk about the sentimentality of this book. I wanted to talk about that so much. And then, like I said, when I found out some things about the author, I was like, oh, okay, that's what's going on here. Because the sentimentality seems a little over the top, if I'm being honest. Like throughout the book, I'm like, really? These guys are like hugging and crying all the time, and they're all into books and horses, and that's a little weird, It was making me almost put like a little bit of a queer read on the book. I was like, oh, come on, man! Like this is really not how men interact with one another, or rather, heterosexual men, not to be heteronormative, but we'll learn more about what's going on there, I think, when we get to my biggest surprise.
I think I will, just to speak to that, because I know where you're going with that, and that's something we'll talk about. But I think also keep in mind that it's written from the point of view of Pony Boy. Pony Boy is 14 years old, and the rest of them, none of them are except Derry. Derry is the only one I think he's 20.
He's supposed to be 20, which is not very old, by the way.
Yeah, so he's like 20 years old. And he's the only one that's very stoic about everything. The toughest guy there, Dally, I think is like 17 or 18, even though his ID says 21, so you can buy booze. But I mean, all of them are kids. I mean, they're kids. That's the point, is they're kids. I don't know. So I see where you're going, like I said, and we won't spoil anything yet. But
what are we drinking this week?
I felt it appropriate. I found it's just a simple recipe. It's called a spiked cherry soda. So it's just 1 tablespoon maraschino cherry syrup, basically 1.5 ounces of white rum, 8 ounces of cherry cola, and 1 maraschino cherry. And that's the entire drink. You just pour it over ice, mix it up, and away you go. And I'm pouring the syrup right now.
It is an admirably simple cocktail in my book. Yes, I think it's really very nice to have something that was so easy to make. So I try to use what's on hand. So I've got grenadine syrup, which I guess is probably good enough to suffice for the maraschino. Is that any difference in any important way? I guess it's got pomegranate in it and not cherry. But
well, it depends. If you're using the store-bought grenadine, then what you're drinking is corn syrup with some color added to it, which is bright red. I don't know if it has any flavoring, to be honest with you.
It says cherry and pomegranate juice.
Oh, okay.
So this kind of vies for possibly my biggest surprise of the week. It's got 1% alcohol in it.
Really? Well, you're drinking a different type of grenadine than I've ever had.
I didn't know that was a thing. I mean, this is if I'd have known that when I was in high school, I would have been drinking.
Can you hold up your bottle?
What is this? This is 12 ounces. 12 ounces of grenadine.
Oh,
syrup.
yeah, that's totally different. That's not the standard stuff is that bottle of like atomic red syrup inside, and it's just complete trash. Yeah, for grenadine. Most grenadine is real garbage. Real grenadine is
then this must be something my wife bought then, if it's any quality. So that's good.
Right. Well, it was for a real cocktail party. In any case, that's a drink. So it's a spiked cherry soda, which makes sense because you got the whole Coke. Almost seemed like they sponsored this book. Throughout it, everybody's drinking a Coke and a pop and stuff like that.
No, it's Pepsi. It's Pepsi. He's obsessed with Pepsi.
He's obsessed with Pepsi. But at the drive-in, they're drinking Cokes. Remember?
Yeah, they do both. So I think this was. Yeah, I don't know who was sponsoring this one. Whoever sponsored it screwed up and let the other guy. Maybe they co-sponsored it. No, it's a very tasty drink. It basically just seems like I'm drinking cherry Coke. Although at first there was an awful lot of rum on top because I didn't have anything to stir. So my first couple of sips just tasted like rum. But I wanted to ask about the rum. So you said white rum. So I'm assuming white rum's kind of the neutral version of rum, the neutral spirit version of rum, like with nothing added to it. I actually have gold. So am I ruining this drink, or what's the difference there?
I don't think so. You're not gonna notice a lot. I think the important part is that it's not like Captain Morgan, like spiced rum.
Okay, no, it's not spiced.
Which has flavors in it and stuff. So,
but so I guess what I wanted to ask about that, and this is by way of we don't talk as much about the drinks these days, but the interesting question to me is, okay, so it's white rum, so neutral spirit version of rum. So why use rum instead of some different spirit? What makes neutral rum different from using vodka or different from using?
Well, so vodka is supposedly a true neutral spirit. In other words, there's no taste associated with it. There's not supposed to be any taste. Rum will have a taste, even though it's neutral. It will have a taste because rum. I can taste
that there's rum in this. Like it tastes like rum.
So rum is made from molasses and typically brown sugar. Okay. Or raw cane sugar. And so it'll taste like molasses. See, rum was created as a way to kind of get rid of molasses, which was like the leftover junk, right? So they distilled it, turned it into rum. And the darker, the more molasses you use, the darker the rum will be. Like there's that dark of the particular Myers. It's Myers dark rum. Used in it's used in a drink called Dark and Stormy.
Those are good. I like those.
Those are very good. Yeah. And but it's really sweet, and that's because it has a lot of molasses in it, and so it creates this really sweet distillate. Typical rum will be sort of sweet, but it won't be as sweet as a dark rum. It's also the reason a gold rum is gold or a dark rum is dark is also because they're aged, just like any other spirit. When you age it in a charred oak barrel, it gets that coloring from oak, and it'll affect the taste of that rum now. Now it's got all these other flavors going on.
So there's nothing. The brownness has nothing to do with the brown sugar or the molasses, which no, it's entirely the same way. The same way that a whiskey is aged in a barrel and it imparts a color. The barrel. That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. This is why I ask these questions. You're the guy to go to about the history of spirits and things. So,
and honestly, in a drink like this, like in a drink that because the cherry syrup and the cherry Coke would pretty much drown out any other nuanced flavors from the spirit anyway.
I can taste that it's rum rather than something else. It does taste
no, I'm not saying about the rum. I'm just saying the difference between a white rum or a gold rum.
I had a bad experience with rum early in my career as a drinker, I guess you'd say. And so I've stayed away from it over the years. I don't really enjoy like sipping rum, but we had a friend in Las Cruces, a doctor who was from Jamaica, and he was actually like a connoisseur, and he had lots of different types of rum and had us try some. And I was thinking maybe I should, it does have its own taste, and maybe I should get back into it. I'd say I prefer sipping rum to sipping tequila, if I'm being honest. I don't really love the taste of tequila, like when and that's a thing you're supposed to get into in New Mexico, but I just never. I tried it a few times and I was just like, just different gradations of kind of smells, tastes like a cigarette, like to me for some reason.
Yeah, it's definitely acquired. Rum is a lot easier to acquire than
Yeah.
tequila, that's for sure. They don't talk, in the book, and again, there's a reason for this reveal at the end, but they don't talk a lot about drinking in the book. They say that so and so was drunk, like the socials were drunk and looking for a fight, and they talk about people getting drunk, like Dally getting drunk. It doesn't spend a lot of time on what they drank or anything like that.
No, it doesn't at all. He just
Hmm.
says, "Oh, I'm going to go get drunk." They never
Yeah,
even say, "I'm going to drink
and
beer." Or, I'm going to
and at the
drink.
drive-in, the socials sneak in booze is all it says. They snuck
Yeah,
in
that's
booze.
right. It's generic. It totally
Yeah,
is.
it's right.
We get Pepsi, we get
Yeah,
Coke, but we
yep.
don't get specific types of alcohol. That's
And
interesting
again, I think there's a reason for that. But again, we'll talk about it later. So
because
so we get,
because of the writer's personal traits. Yeah, that does make sense. Actually,
perhaps.
now that you mention it, yeah.
So what did you think of the story itself?
So the story itself, I enjoyed the story.
Mhm.
I can see why this is seen as being a progenitor of the YA genre because it's melodramatic, right? It's very melodramatic. I mean, in the middle of the story, they run into a burning building and save children from a fire.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were going to list plot devices in melodrama,
Mhm.
saving children from a burning building is number one on the list. I
Yeah.
mean, that's
Right.
when I see that in a movie or a book, I'm like, oh, come on, man. But
Mhm.
that said, I thought it was pretty effective. I actually was like,
Mhm.
oh, go. I'm glad these guys are getting a chance to be heroes because they're kind
Right.
of put upon and they're kind of underdogs and not
Mhm.
even just underdogs, but Dally, for example, is like a bad guy.
Mhm.
He seems like the bad guy in the group.
Mhm.
And then he gets a real opportunity to sort of shine because even though he's the guy who, cusses in front of girls and tries to upset them and stuff,
Mhm.
who's the one that they call when they murder somebody? They call him
Right.
and he and he
Mhm.
and he, comes through. He finds them a place to hide out. Then he goes into a burning building to rescue them and help rescue children. So
Mhm.
I liked that it showed that side of them because honestly, Johnny and Ponyboy kind of seem, they seem like good guys from the very beginning. They seem
Right.
kind of a little more soft than the other.
Yeah.
Johnny, because he's been through a trauma, I
Mhm.
think he's kind of described as having PTSD almost from being beaten up so badly that he was almost killed, one
Right.
time.
Mhm.
And Ponyboy just seems like kind of like it's just a softy in general.
He's sensitive. Yeah, he's sensitive.
He's sensitive.
He
Yeah.
likes to read, and he's good at he gets good grades, and he's thoughtful, and he's considerate. And
Yeah.
yeah, he's not like the others.
So I enjoyed reading, even like I said, even though it was melodramatic, I thought it was pretty effective melodrama through that
Mhm.
part of the story. The part where the melodrama, I think, goes over the top and kind of, for me, flops because I'm a
Mhm.
grown up and I've read a lot of things and it's very difficult to take seriously. Is Johnny's death
Mhm.
is corny,
Yeah.
corny AF. He just kind of randomly dies. Like it's not described why or what exactly. Why does his condition take a dip?
Mhm.
So badly. They also mentioned that he's suffering from shock, which is one of the things that drives. So my wife's a physician, and
Mhm.
one of the things that drives her crazy or drives me crazy because I had to ask her. I was like, shock is like a whole different. It's not just you don't just get scared really bad and then you have shock, right? Shock is something that happens to you. I think it has to do with your blood pressure dropping really rapidly when you're injured
Mhm.
badly. It has nothing to do with being scared, and they fell prey to that in this book. They do that all the time in movies
Mhm.
and TV. They talk about,
You know,
oh,
it's
he's got a
it's
case of
easy.
shock.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just easy, and you can pretty much describe any type of traumatic or some type of trauma as he's in shock or she's in shock or something like that. And
right.
so it's like an
Right.
easy device.
There's a kid in Jaws that almost gets killed by the shark, and then he's in
Yeah,
shock,
he's
and
in
I'm like,
shock. Yeah.
that's not what that means. Like if it bit off your leg, you might be in
Yeah.
shock, but that's
Right.
not. Yeah, that part was a little corny, but it didn't ruin the book for me. I really the ending I thought was the weakest bit. I think the sort of I like how there's the climax of the big fight, the big
Hmm.
rumble. Oh, by the way, West Side Story.
Hmm. Right.
Speaking of things that do the greaser archetype and rumbles
Yeah.
and stuff like that, West Side Story. This one's a lot like West Side Story.
Yeah.
I would
Let's see.
imagine this kid probably watched West Side Story when the author was growing up. They probably watched West Side Story, right? I mean, this would have been a huge influence. West Side Story's best picture in like
50,
1960, 61, something like that.
57.
Oh, 57. Okay. Well, still,
Yeah.
but this is something that would have been familiar to the author.
Yes, of course.
So I think that's in this. There's a lot of stuff in the 50s, I think, that gives you sort of the greaser idea. I don't know about the word greaser. I don't know if that, but rumble, don't they say rumble in West Side Story?
Mhm. I think so.
They,
Yeah.
they refer to that.
I
But
think so.
anyway, so I thought there's the big rumble, and that's fine. And they don't dwell on it too much. It's pretty good. It's pretty well written. And then there's a lot of aftermath.
Mhm.
because then Ponyboy goes through this whole denouement of like trauma after the fight and stuff. And I thought
Mhm.
that was pretty good. That was a pretty good ending.
Mhm.
And then the boys have it out with each other. What's the
Mhm.
last name? It's the Curtis
I
brothers,
think
right?
so. Yeah, I think it is Curtis. Yeah,
So the
Ponyboy
three
Curtis.
Curtis brothers kind of have it out with each other. And I thought it was pretty cool that Soda, the one that is like the sort of happy-go-lucky pretty boy, is the one that gives them a speech that sort of brings them back all together. I thought that was pretty good
Yeah,
because it seemed more like it would be Derry, right?
Derry. Uh huh. Uh huh.
Derry
Yes,
and
Derry.
Ponyboy are the thinkers of the group, and then Soda Boy is the one that
Mhm.
kind of gives them a talking to and sets everybody
Right.
straight. So I thought that was pretty good. But the whole thing where Dally goes and robs a liquor store. Did I miss that? Did that
Right.
happen? That happened, right? That
Yeah, that
that
happened. It was almost like suicide by cop. Is sort of what
it
it
was exactly like
seemed
that.
like.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. It
know,
was like
like he
there's a
went
suicide by
went.
cop, and Johnny dies like all in the same span of like 20 pages. And I was like, this is the worst part of the book.
Dally's, I think, was striking out because of Johnny's death. Like, apparently, he
Right.
cared so much for Johnny. Like, Johnny was his little brother, and he really cared for him. And I mean, it wasn't his little brother for reals, but it was like he
No, no,
was like
yeah.
his little brother, and he cared so much for him. Right? There was injustice in the world that Johnny died. Out of all the people, how come Johnny died? Right?
Right.
And so he acts out as a result of that. And it's sort of like I said, there were, some characters were really had a lot of complexity. Some were really two dimensional. Like most of the socials were pretty much just these foils without a
Yeah.
lot of story or anything complexity
Well,
to them.
There's two that get some characterization. There's Cherry Valance, who's kind of
Yeah,
the
Cherry.
go-between.
Hmm.
She's the girl who Ponyboy makes friends with, but she's really into
Right.
Dally. She's not
Yeah.
really into Ponyboy because he's too young, I guess. But I thought it was kind of funny because the book is about class, right? It's all about class
Right.
divisions to some
Uh-huh.
extent, which is
Yep.
probably why
Mhm.
people still read it today. Probably it's kind of like a
Yeah.
Marxist thing, like anything about class
Well,
is
I think it's fairly timeless. I mean, it's a really
yeah.
easy formula that you can apply anything to. At pretty much any age, you've got class
Well,
divisions.
kind of like
You
West
know,
Side Story. West Side Story
yeah.
is about the divisions of race. It's
Hmm.
very similar,
Right.
and that's a
Yep.
reference to Romeo and Juliet, which is about differences
Right.
between clans, and so it's
Right.
sort of
So.
not just class. Like class is the wrong word, but like whatever social divisions are important in your society,
Right.
and the way that
Yeah.
young people go across those, they repeat those boundaries, with the
Hmm.
socias and the greasers, but then they also break those boundaries, and it's usually because of sex, right?
Hmm.
Like
Right.
Romeo and Juliet hook up because they're into each other. They don't care who's a Montague and who's a Capulet. And West Side
Right.
Story, who cares? She's Puerto Rican. She's hot.
Yeah.
And this
Right.
one, Cherry and Dally are into each other because it's like, look at him. He's amazing. Like even
Yeah.
though he's a greaser, like he's an amazing. So I guess that's kind of a what's that? But that's like a positive story. Like that you can always physical attraction always like trumps the boundaries
Trumps everything else.
of social division. So that's
I think it was more than physical attraction, though, because the author does a really good job at painting the socias out to be very evil, twisted people, right? They're supposed to be the upper class. Okay. So they're
right.
supposed to be, it's like it's Johnny from Karate Kid. It's kind of funny.
Oh, absolutely.
They're
Absolutely.
they're
Yeah.
they're the country club set.
Which
Right.
is
Right.
Ralph
So
Macchio who plays Johnny
no,
in
no, no,
this
Ralph.
in The
Oh, yeah,
Outsiders.
yeah. Yeah,
Ralph
that's right.
Macchio plays Johnny, and then Johnny is the
Right.
bad guy who's the Soch
Yeah,
in
Johnny's the
Karate
bad guy,
Kid.
right?
So,
But that, Johnny, the Cobra Kai kids, so they're all upper class, they're all country club
right.
set, right? But yet it turns out they're all a bunch of bums. I mean, they're all a bunch of jerks, right? How do
Right.
we know that?
Right.
Because he's mean to his ex-girlfriend because he tosses her soccer ball away. And and he smokes pot and he smokes pot in the bathroom in a time when
Yeah.
pot and like, how did you know somebody was bad? They smoke pot, right?
Right.
And so he's smoking
Right.
a joint, and then Ralph Macchio has to ruin it by spraying him with a shower. What did he think was going to happen?
Yeah. Yeah.
A group of five guys, after he sprays them with water, all they're trying to do is have a joint. It's the exact same thing, right? So you have this upper crust, but it turns out they're the ones that are really bad. The greasers are noble, right? They have this
Right.
nobility to them.
Right.
And that was the thing about Dally was a bad guy, meaning that he would rob things, he'd beat people up. He was a part of a street gang in New York.
He says things in front of girls that are so
Yes,
bad that they're not even in
right.
the book. It's just he says
Yes,
bad.
he
Like
just says
the
bad
author,
stuff. Yeah,
the author couldn't bring
so
themselves
bad you
to
can't
write
imagine it.
down the things that he said to them. And
That's
I
how
was,
bad they are,
boy,
right?
my 21st century mind was really filling in the details there. Like, what
They
would he
must
be
be bad.
saying? Like, what, you know?
At the same time, he'll protect his friends. He will, go out and help a member of his,
Yeah.
society, a member of his community. So he had nobility, and he was actually noble to the girls too. He talked tough and everything else, but he was still. It's not like he would force himself on them or anything like that.
Well,
He
no,
wouldn't
but
treat them.
he kind of just leaves, right? He doesn't really interact with the girls
Yeah.
anymore. He kind
Well,
of,
no, there's that story about his when he went to jail, the
uh,
girl that he was dating or whatever was trying to get with all the other guys or something.
whose girlfriend got pregnant and had to go live with her grandparents in Florida or something like that? Was
Oh, that was
which
Soda Pops, but she
that's
didn't she
Soda
didn't
Pops.
get
Okay.
pregnant. Yeah, she didn't get pregnant. It was either she stays there and well, they don't come
No,
out and
no, she's
say it.
pregnant. Yeah, no, she's pregnant. It was either they get married or she goes to live with her. That's
Or she goes
means
to
she's
Florida.
pregnant.
Yeah.
In
Yeah, she's
1960,
pregnant.
in 1967
Right.
speak, that's pregnant. No,
Yeah.
no. And
But
then it
no,
turns out
no,
he wasn't even the father that they
Dowley
find out
goes to
later.
jail and his
Uh,
girlfriend starts to try to make moves on the other members of the gang. And
oh,
I
okay.
think I can't remember if it's Dowley or one of the others that warns everybody, stay away from her. He didn't treat her very well, but she wasn't a person worthy of being treated well, is sort of what the book said. That a girl like
Right.
Cherry, he would never treat like that because she's not that kind of girl. I mean, that's sort of
Oh,
what what
that's
what
not
I how I read it.
that's not super admirable behavior though. Like just being like,
No,
oh,
no.
this girl's
All I'm
trash.
saying,
This girl comes from a nice
well,
family.
in comparison to the socials though, which would push them around and all this other stuff, right?
Oh, well, yeah, I guess
So,
so.
and I think that's the comparison that we're trying to make is you have to look at them. One side is looked down on because everybody thinks they're trash, but they're actually noble is looked on as if they're noble, but they're actually trash. So I don't know. I think all in all, I think it was as it was written, it was it flowed really well. It was very elementary in a lot of areas, but again, I
Yeah.
didn't realize it was written for youth,
One of the things I noticed about the book is that structurally, something that's so I've written a whole novel before, and one of the things that's very difficult to do, and it's unless you go back and revise a whole lot, I think it's pretty much impossible to do, is that structurally, when this book sets up a pin, it knocks that pin down.
Yeah.
You don't ever,
Yes.
like they mention his switchblade, and it's like Chekhov's switchblade. Like I said to
Yeah.
myself, somebody's getting stabbed with that switchblade. Sure
Yep.
enough, somebody gets stabbed moments later. Like he mentions, oh, I always wondered what it was like to be inside of a burning ember. And then like 20 pages later, he's inside a burning church and he's like, oh, now I know what it's like to be
Yeah.
inside. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. You set that
I
one up
like
and knocked it down. It
I
was
like
very
well
consistent. But
the most obvious one is the Robert Frost poem about nothing gold can last.
is that the poem that was read at JFK's inauguration, the Frost
I don't
poem?
know.
Robert Frost is very much on the national consciousness in the 1960s.
If only we had a way to find out.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm in the middle of a podcast. I can't be Googling stuff
I
right
could.
now.
Oh, that's what it's for. Hold on.
Oh, well, I guess so.
Uh,
But yeah, they talk
Robert
about,
Frost.
we were really
Yeah.
careful in the church because it looked super flammable. And if we dropped the cigarette, it
Yeah.
burned out. And then you're like,
Yeah.
well, I guess that church is burning to the ground in a couple of minutes. But it's good writing. It's a little ham-fisted. Like I think a more mature writer would have maybe used a little obfuscation, like lay those hints down, but then not make them so obvious so that when it happens later, you're like, oh, that's why that was set up earlier.
Right.
Like, well, that's a really bizarre thing to mention. I think that's probably going to come up again
Well,
later.
again, I think you have to consider the audience, the target audience here. So the JFK inauguration poem was called "The Gift Outright,"
Okay.
and
Okay.
and this poem is called "Nothing Gold Can Stay."
Right.
But that one was an impressive one because it doesn't come back until the end. Well, towards the end with Johnny, his last words. So, and it was really profound.
Yeah, Stay
That
Gold.
point.
I remembered you said Stay Gold, Pony Boy, like when we were talking about doing this, and I was thinking, oh, I'm familiar with that line from this movie, despite never having seen it. I thought that was just something that these outsider kids said to each other all the time. They just said, Stay Gold, like, yo, be gold. Like,
Yeah,
it was just
sounds cool.
their thing. They said, I didn't realize it was going to be a reference to a Robert Frost poem. That was pretty cool. He mentions how Johnny was like kind of slow, but would really fixate on what he did understand. And that makes sense. He didn't listen to much, but he listened to that poem. And I think it's pretty much his dying words, right? Isn't that like the last thing
Yeah,
he says?
yeah.
Like, yeah, so
Stay gold, pony boy. Yeah.
that's pretty dope. I gotta say, if I can
Yeah.
learn a poem and like use it on my deathbed, I'm gonna do that. Like,
Well, I just liked, I like the because you're right. Oh, he had a switchblade. Pages later, he stabbed somebody with a switchblade.
right.
I like the poem because it was a passing reference, and then it's used 2 chapters later. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a slow
Yeah, yeah.
burn to use it, and it's
That
really
was more
meaningful.
clever
So
because I didn't realize it was coming, and I didn't really and it didn't seem contrived. It seemed, even though Johnny's set up as being kind of an ignorant character, or ignorant or illiterate character,
yeah,
him talking about a Robert Frost poem at the end of the book seems pretty natural from the way that they
yeah,
handled it. So
yeah.
I thought that was pretty good. What do you think about, so in the same sequence where they're hiding in the church, they get
Huh?
the book Gone with the Wind. This
Yeah.
is a literature class question from me to you, but why Gone with the Wind? What's going on there? Class to some extent?
It could be class for some extent, but it also could be.
He keeps
I mean,
talking about the gallantry of the characters, like the
yep.
southern bourbon culture of like fighting and nobility and stuff. But
And in the book, they write off knowing that they're going to, go into certain death. I mean, it's like the charge of the Light Brigade, but they did it willingly, like they knew what they were facing, but they had to do it. So it's like the myth of duty, what you're drawn to do and what you have to do, despite knowing that the
like
ending is
chivalry,
certain.
like a myth of
Definitely,
chivalry.
definitely chivalry, and I think the comparison is between Dowley, and I keep bringing up Dowley because that's the one that the author points out. He's actually kind of noble. Like at first, Ponyboy doesn't like him. Out of
Okay.
all of the group, I don't like Dowley. I'm scared of Dowley. Dowley's a bad guy, but
Right.
then he comes around on Dowley because he starts seeing that Dowley's a lot more complex than he's just a bad dude. Right? He's not Corn Pop after all. He's somebody else. You like that?
I guess Rhett
Reference?
Butler has that kind of attraction for Scarlett O'Hara, right? He's kind of the
I think
bad
so.
boy.
Yeah, he's the bad boy, right?
Yeah. I
And
guess that makes sense.
but he's drawn to his duty. Like this is what I have to do.
But he won't even join the fight until the very end. It's only after Atlanta's set on fire where he's like, okay, now I'm going to join the army and fight.
Yes, but yeah.
Like,
Well,
what are you doing? This is where you go home to your family.
It's all symbolic. I mean, or not it's all symbolism, right? Yeah, you should at this point. This is the point you should retire. But I'm not going to retire. I'm going to go die instead. Although I have this beautiful woman that's chasing after me. Isn't that what Dowley does? I mean,
he goes and gets himself killed.
Gets himself killed
after the Rumble.
After
the Rumble is the burning of Atlanta. So that happens, and then he goes and gets himself killed. Like, well, or wait, or
I think it's John. I think it's Johnny.
Johnny's death is the burning of Atlanta.
Yes, right. And so he's too late to do anything about it. Right. I'm gonna go scream into a volcano.
Dowley versus the volcano
at a hurricane. Yeah, I'm gonna go scream at a hurricane and try to stop it. Although I know that I'm gonna die, type of thing. So I think it sets that up. And then I just think that, there's a lot of fatalism in it. I think Gone with the Wind is like kind of filled with fatalism.
Yeah.
After all, tomorrow is another day. It's just life sucks. Get on with it.
Well, that's where, I don't want to get into too much of a talk about Gone with the Wind, but that's where she's decided that she can change things and she can get out there and change the world. And anyway, that book's terrible and racist, and we shouldn't. There's nothing to say about it.
Should you put a warning at the beginning of this?
Yes, we probably should put a trigger alert in front of it.
Well, people smoke in this book too, in the new Disney.
I was actually going to bring that up. They refer to cigarettes as cancer sticks. That seemed anachronistic to me.
And weeds.
Weed is just weird. I was like, okay, weed. They also refer to getting stoned, but they mean drunk. Nobody smokes pot in this. Right. They talk about getting stoned, and they mean drunk. And they say weed for cigarettes, but then they also call them cancer sticks. And I was thinking, I thought it was like a big mystery that it caused cancer in the 60s. I thought it wasn't until...
Maybe it was said in jest or like, tongue in cheek type of thing. I don't know. Because I'm sure people were sounding the alarm, and the advertising execs, if you've ever seen Mad Men, were like, no, it's fine. 5 out of 6.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Doctors prefer camels. So his 20-year-old brother is admonishing his 14-year-old younger brother to only have 1 pack a day. If you smoke more than 1 pack a day, I'm going to kick your butt. I was like, oh my God.
Can you imagine?
1 pack a day?
Wow. So, yeah. No, that's pretty bad. I was talking about how sentimental all these punks were, all these greasers are. And you know what movie it reminded me of when I was looking at that?
Hold on.
The dynamic between all these tough guys and how much they love each other and they hug all the time and stuff. Like,
all right, I give up.
The Fast and the Furious.
Oh
I
God,
was
it's
thinking
all
it's
about
like
family. It's
it's
all
all
about
about
family.
family, you know, and like
Yeah,
everybody
it's all
loves
about
each other and they're
family.
always hugging and crying and stuff like. And I was like, okay, that's like the sort of
At the end,
sentimental interior to these
yeah,
tough guys is just kind of it just
yeah.
sounded just
Well,
like it.
that's how you make tough guys human, right? Otherwise, Vin Diesel would just be beating the crap out of people all through the
Well,
movie,
and
and
stealing and like
and
maybe
stealing.
killing
Yeah, yeah,
people. Yeah,
yeah.
you know, like
Maiming and killing everybody, blowing stuff up, causing
right.
mayhem across the world, and even into outer space, as it turns out. But by being all
Did
about
they go to
family and having a,
space in one of the later Fast and the
I think
Furious
so.
movies?
I think so.
Oh,
Yeah.
for God's
And
sake.
but being all
Yeah.
about family and having a barbecue at the very end and talking about
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
my family and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
That makes
Yeah.
some supposedly makes them human. Now it's become a punchline because they do it in every stupid movie. And
Right.
everybody's like, okay, yeah, you're all about family after you beat the crap out of some guy in the
Right.
bathroom.
The other movie it really reminded me of that I think is closer in spirit to this is Breakfast Club. I think there's a lot
Hmm.
of this movie. I think aren't there some of the same actors maybe? Actually, I can't
Well,
think of an example of anybody
Emilio
who's in both.
Estevez. Emilio Estevez was
Is
in both.
Emilio Estevez in the Outsiders movie?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like
He
it sort
played
of
RV,
humanizes
Cherry,
the
and Valley,
jocks.
but
The
they never
jocks
really
all
get
have like a
together. But Pony
reason
Boy
for
and
why
No.
they're
Cherry
jerks. And it's
spend,
got like
they
the
spend
sweet
time together
girls and
and
the pretty
stuff.
girls. The
So there's
Cherry
this
balance is
bonding
pretty much
between them
the
that
Ali
brings the
Sheedy.
two
No,
groups
not Ali
together.
Sheedy.
And then there's like a big tragic event that kind of kernel is the or crystallizes the whole conflict, right? And blows it up and magnifies it.
Yeah, like Mercutio dies, or is it Tybalt?
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
I can't
no,
remember.
Mercutio. No, it's
Yeah,
Mercutio. Yeah,
yeah,
Mercutio
yeah.
dies. Plague on both your families, and then
Right,
it's
right.
just after
Wait
that,
for
it's
me
just
tomorrow when
all.
you will find me a grave, man.
Yeah,
Doesn't
that's
Johnny say
right.
something like that?
Great line. You even have the swords if you think about it. Like you want to talk Shakespeare, they're all carrying switchblades. I mean, come on.
Well,
They
that's what they
all.
do in the Romeo and Juliet film, the
Yep.
Leonardo DiCaprio. Everybody's gun says like
It's
rapier
called.
on
It's,
it.
give me my long sword. He reaches and his
Yeah,
long sword on the
yeah.
on the pistol.
Apparently, we really want to watch that movie again because we've been talking about it constantly. But
Someday. I just don't want to get into Shakespeare. I got to be honest with you. That would be
we
a
did
five
Macbeth. I had
episode
fun with
series.
Macbeth. I want
I
to do another.
know.
So I think we're kind of getting around to the time we should talk about biggest surprise, right? My biggest surprise in this, so I had a couple of little tiny surprises. I didn't expect the book to be as plot driven as it was. I sort of thought that it was just a pastiche of kids living and I thought it was the 50s. It's not too surprising that it was the 60s, but I thought it was just going to be these kids walking around and talking and sort of showing like what their lives were like. And it turned out to be actually like a plot. I really had no idea where it took place. I could tell because there was a lot of y'all being thrown around because people
And
had
rodeo
horses.
stuff.
Yeah, rodeos. People had horses, exactly. So I was thinking, and they talk about New York as if it's, might as well be China because it's super far
Right,
away
right,
and mystical.
right.
And so I figured it was in the South somewhere, and I couldn't quite put a finger on where it was. So I looked it up. It's apparently loosely based on Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I
Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah,
would have never
I
come
wouldn't have
up with
gotten that
in a
either.
million years.
Yep.
That was pretty surprising. And I was headed into recording, planning to talk about how Tulsa was my biggest surprise. When I did a little background research, I remembered to look up the author. And the first sentence, I realized the author. So I knew the author was like 16. That's pretty cool. That we haven't really talked much about that, but I did know that, and I had that in mind. But the author's a girl.
Yeah.
That shocked me. I was like, first of all, I was like, oh wow, that's really, I didn't see that at all. And then I thought about it and I was thinking, let me do a little parenthetical story here. I was in a writing class one time where we exchanged papers and we all read somebody else's paper. And then you were supposed to go the next day to group and talk about their paper and whatnot. So I get this story and I read all the way through it. And I was thinking, wow, it's like one of the worst stories I've ever read. There's something missing from it. There's like some gap in this story. And I couldn't put a finger on what it was. I could not tell you what was wrong with this story. And then I get to the group and we sit down and I give the paper back and it's a blind girl. And it suddenly dawned on me. There was no visual description in the entire story. And I went and read it again and I was like, that's what it was. That's what was missing. It's not bad writing. It's just this person lacks an entire sense that I'm used to reading about.
Right.
That's my primary sense.
Wow. That's interesting.
So it just, something didn't ring true about the writing to me. Now, had I known that about her, I would have read it completely differently and not judged it that way.
Really
this was a bit like this. I kept reading this and I kept thinking, oh, these guys are crying so much. First of all, they were talking about how good looking the other guys were all the time, and not just And not just maybe in their own head, but like talking about it out loud. And I was thinking, well, is that what people did in the 60s? Because that's not, I don't talk about how good looking my friends are. That's weird. And then I also wrote this note. I wrote this note before I knew that the author was a woman, because I thought it was a character who wrote the book. I thought it was pretty much Ponyboy wrote the book. I said, his analysis of people is prodigal. Like, it seems so ahead of the time for a 15, 16-year-old boy to be writing about why people do things and what their motivations are and what their relationships to each other, to the point where I was thinking, this guy is phenomenal. And then I realized that he's not. It's a woman. Of course, she understands the relationships between people and what their motivations are in a way that seems light years beyond what a 15-year-old boy is capable of, because it's light years beyond what a 15-year-old boy is capable of. There's no guy who understands people this well. It's just it's just not a thing. And it's very clearly, and also, frankly, how ahead of the years the writer is, what a good writer this person is at this age, is also just probably a woman. It's just somebody, it's just everything that didn't quite make sense to me about the book was explained by that to me. I really was like, oh, okay, I get so much more about why the book is the way it is. Because some of it didn't ring true, because it isn't really the way men think. But some of it was also better. It was better than it would have been if a boy wrote it.
Now, to be clear, your point is that women are, can more critically think about sensitivity and those types of things, which I think are
not sensitivity so much, but I've watched with my children just how much more attention little girls and young women pay to other people. Boys, I would send my son to class for months. I'd be say, who's your best friend? Oh, there's this kid I play with every day. What's his name? I don't know. Right. And I'd ask Cleo, be like, who's in your class? She'd be like, well, there's Billy and there's Mikey and there's Jamel and there's, she would know everybody's name and how old they were and where they grew up. And she knew everything about the people. She was thinking about them constantly. I think to some extent, to most boys, the other people are like objects. You don't even really think about what's going on inside their head. You have zero theory of mind until you get much older and more mature. I mean, just way farther along in your life. And it showed. I think the psychological profiling that's going on in this book seems completely abnormal for a 14-year-old boy. And it's because it's not really true to life.
Yeah. Well, I just like to actually speak to that real quick. This was written by a 16-year-old girl. She published it at 18 when she graduated. But I think I'm blown away by that. I made sure to tell my daughter who's 16, I'm like, look what you can do if you wanted to. Look what seriously, I mean, this is.
Well, you don't want to give her a complex like Julius Caesar crying he hasn't conquered the world yet at 32, like Alexander the Great.
Well, that's true, but I'm just saying, look what girls like you are capable of, I guess, is what I'm saying. Whether you do or not is not an issue, but I'm just like, that's fantastic. I think it's awesome. I don't think I've ever read a young adult novel that I can remember. I mean, I'm sure when I was a kid, I read like Hardy Boys and stuff like that. Okay. But I can't remember.
Yeah, that's not what there has to be an element. There has to be an element of adult in young adult, and Hardy Boys does not have it.
So, but what I'm saying is, like, I don't know if it's because there was a lot of stuff that was very simple. That like for example, I'm not going to talk about. I'm just going to say they're drinking booze, because that's all a 16-year-old girl would probably know. They're not going to talk about the kind of booze, what they're drinking, how they're drinking it, how much they drink, whatever.
Right.
It was just
that detail just isn't there because it's not.
It's available. Just booze is a bad thing, and I'm going to make them that they got drunk because that helps me say that they're bad or whatever.
I remember writing a story once. I wrote a story once in high school where some people did drugs. Like I was like, oh,
they just did drugs.
These guys were doing drugs because I had no idea.
They did more drugs than anybody did drugs before.
So many drugs.
They did so much drugs.
Even though drugs are bad and they should have said no to drugs, they did.
Yes, they didn't say no to those drugs. And I was like, I don't know if it's because, like, if an adult would write it the same way because of the audience they're writing to, because the audience also wouldn't know any of that stuff or really care about it, right? To the audience, you have certain signs or signals or symbols or whatever that just mean certain things. Like a young audience would say, okay, booze is bad. This person's doing a bunch of booze and they're drunk, right? And so I know that's bad. That equals bad.
Right.
That's what I need for the story to move on. So I don't know if it's because you see what I'm saying? Like there was things in it. Like I don't know if it was written like that because she was young or if any adults would write it the same way because of the audience they're writing to. I don't know.
It's so it's a really interesting, and I was just kind of mulling this over while you were saying that. I think that what YA fiction has become is it has become a marketing like slot, that like a target audience for a certain kind of literature. And so what you have is you have an adult author like Stephanie Meyer, or that's a bad example because she was not an author before she wrote her books, but James Patterson will literally sit down and he'll say, well, these are the things that have to be in a YA novel. I'm a 70-year-old man, but I'm going to write a book that's targeted at these people, and I'm going to make sure it includes certain elements. And the strange thing is I think this book pretty well encapsulates what is supposed to be in a YA book, but it was actually written by a YA. Yeah, that's why this hit exactly what those people want to have in their books, which is not the like you talk about the Hardy Boys. The Hardy Boys, their conflicts are resolved like that in a snap. It might as well be a Scooby-Doo, right?
Right.
And an adult book, the conflicts might not be resolved at all, or they might be overly complicated. These ones are, reasonably difficult conflicts to deal with, but they do get resolution, and they do get fairly simple resolution. There's a little bit of romantic, there's something in the air of romance and violence. Tension, right? It's a little antiseptic. I think that today YA probably would go a little bit farther into being more erotic almost, because it's just considered to be more appropriate for young adults. I don't know if young adults are really into that yet, but it gets in there sometimes. Sexuality creeps in very often in YA a lot of the time. So it's funny to me that it's become this thing that everybody can do, and it was created by an actual young adult. I think that's interesting. It's really cool. I kind of like knowing that.
And also, just to mention that, so S.E. Hinton, I can't remember what the S.E. stands for.
I can't remember if it's like her fake initials, but I know she wanted to do.
No, it's her initials. It was her publisher that said that, so that people wouldn't know that she's a girl or a woman,
right? Which I think was a great decision. I would have viewed the book completely differently if I'd known it was written by a woman.
Well, and it's because they didn't want the critics, the literary critics, discounting her just because she's a woman, right?
Right.
Remember, this is 1967, so she went by S.E. and then she just stayed with S.E. for the rest of her career. But essentially, she invented this genre. This is the first, this is the invention of the genre of young adult, which I think is fantastic. That this is sort of the first instantiation of
and we didn't get around.
Now is a huge genre.
Oh, it's a huge billions of dollars a year, but I don't know if it's billions, but it's a lot. It probably is billions, right?
It might be,
So we didn't officially get into starting the discussion of whether or not to toast it, but these are all the things I would say about whether I should toast it. I think in itself, this book, to me, reading it as an adult, it's kind of melodramatic. It's not great. There's not a whole lot of interpretive value. There's a few, it's very YA. There's a few sort of forays into interpretive value. Like we're asking ourselves, well, why Gone with the Wind? Are there really a lot of symbols in this book? Not really. There's some themes that sort of, the burning church. I think you probably would be doing yourself a disservice if you analyzed why a church, why does the church burn? I think that was just a place she picked for sanctuary because she probably read about it in Hunchback of Notre Dame. As a place where you go
sanctuary. Good point.
So I think you could probably take that too far, but because this is, like you said, the first instantiation of YA, that's a big deal. And I enjoyed the read. The read was fine. It's not bad. It's a good book. I would give it to my son and be like, here, read The Outsiders. Maybe we'll watch the movie. It really does read like something that needs a movie. I mean, what a perfect idea for a movie.
Right.
Young people's conflict. Hey, we're forced into casting really, really handsome young men. And by the way, the woman, Cherry Valance, is played by a young Diane Lane.
Yes.
So I mean, you're just basically putting like all these beautiful young people,
all the best looking people in the world.
Essentially. So I would definitely toast this. I think this was great.
Oh, very good.
I don't think it's like the best book I've ever read or anything, but it's an important book in terms of understanding an entire genre spawn. So I think it's worth toasting. So
fantastic.
Tip up my giant plastic Yoda cup filled with cherry Coke, and
let's see if I can give us a decent sound. Hold on. Oh, that was terrible.
I didn't hear it.
You'll have to edit that in.
No sound.
Let me just speak. You talked about the importance. So this book has sold 15 million copies since it was published. They still sell 500,000 copies a year of this book. Isn't that incredible?
That is a lot.
1965 or 1967 rather.
That
And
math doesn't work though. You'd think it would have sold a lot more copies than that then.
I don't know, that's what it says. They sell
500,000 a
500,000
year
copies
for
a year.
50 years. That'd be more than, but
That's what the current
that's a lot
thing
of
said.
a lot of copies anyways.
Yeah, there's a lot of copies.
Oh, I forgot to tell a funny anecdote about this.
Okay, we got time.
In Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Uh-huh.
there's a house that was in the movie.
Oh yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And Danny Boy from House of Pain, the other guy from House of Pain, not Everlast, the one who actually had a career after House of Pain.
Yeah.
But the other guy bought the house and turned it into a museum, and they had this big opening party. And this opening party for the Outsiders house was such an event. I mean, such a global media event that none other than C. Thomas Howell put aside his busy schedule and showed up for the opening
with all that he was doing.
I mean, he was in the middle of, I don't know, there might have been like a
Soul Man 2. Soul Man
2 was probably filming.
Yeah,
the Red Dawn retrospective
Dawn remake,
was on A&E,
absolutely.
so
yeah.
Anyway, but
actually my biggest surprise was about the movie, not the book.
Okay.
Francis Ford Coppola directed that movie.
Right.
I was like, are you kidding me? Godfather directed
as a side project while they were filming it, filmed another S.E. Hinton book, Rumblefish.
Yeah.
During I was like, the filming of Outsiders,
I had no idea she wrote that. So
and had her be in a movie and play a hooker.
Which is fantastic.
In her own movie.
In her own book, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, that's great. I'm glad that you're toasting it. I highly recommend this book, especially, if you got kids. I gave this before I read it. I gave it to my 16-year-old daughter. She loved it. She's reading everything under the sun right now. So, I mean, it's perfect. It hit with her. At home, she really liked it. And I think we're going to watch the movie next because the movie is really good. I mean, it's a really well done movie. I mean, Coppola directed it, so how could it not be? And like you said, it's got Rob Lowe, young Tom Cruise, C. Thomas Howell, Ralph Macchio, Patrick Swayze. Oh, who plays Dally? What's his name?
Matt Dillon.
Matt Dillon. Thank you, young Matt Dillon.
Yeah.
With the exception of the blonde hair, it's a perfect cast for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
wait, who's great. Pony Boy?
Who's Pony was C. Thomas Howell.
That's C. Thomas Howell. Okay, all right, got it. Yeah,
there you go, Pony Boy.
I think we've done our work here. I think this is Dave McArthur saying goodbye to the Toasting the Classics audience.
This is Clint Lanier saying goodbye. Also, thank you.
All right, everybody, peace out. See
for the 5 people that listen. If you ever have any comments, hey, you guys should check this thing out or that thing out, check this book out, check that movie out, we'd love to hear them. Please, I don't know how they get in touch with us.
toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us an email, and if it's a really good idea, we'll even give you a shout out. Why not?
Perfect. Well, again, thanks for joining us.
Bye. That's it for episode 74 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking while we talk about the James Cameron movie The Terminator. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know how you define young adult fiction. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @ractivenuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.